What's up, everybody? How's it going? It's been a very busy week in the sports world. Um, if you know me, you know not only do I love the Dallas Cowboys, but I also love the U.S. Open. So between the roster cuts, between everything that's happening with Micah Parsons and the U.S. Open, I've just had a lot going on and a lot to cover. But of course, as you can tell from the thumbnail, we're gonna hop into this Micah Parsons salary grievance situation first. But we're also gonna talk about what happened with Taylor Townsend and this whole confrontation that she had at the U.S. Open. So thank y'all for rocking with me. Appreciate it. It's gonna be a fun Wednesday night. But as always, I'm here for a good time, not necessarily a long time. So let's get into it.
Queen bitch, supreme bitch, I'ma stay that bitch.
All right. Shout out to everybody watching. By the way, the broadcast is a little bit different tonight because I am on YouTube, I am on X, and I am on Twitch. Now, Twitch, I'm gonna admit I know nothing about. So if anybody's watching on Twitch and there's something I should do different, feel free to send me a message. However, that happens on Twitch, and I will be happy to make adjustments based on that audience. I just hopped on because someone said I should. Back on X for the first time in a long time. Thanks everybody who's joining there. If for some reason I don't see your comments though, and you want to join the conversation, come over to YouTube. I'll be sure to see your comments from there. And if you are on the YouTube side, you might see a couple of links in the pinned comments. And the reason for that is I have been invited to the US Open, which is awesome. Um, but they're not covering 100% of the trip. They are covering enough to where I'm still like I'm going. Of course I'm going. Um, but I want to be able to do things like not have to work while I'm there. So I want to be able to provide y'all with good coverage. I want to show y'all everything that I see while I'm in New York, everything that I see while I'm on the US Open grounds. And in order for me to have time to do that, I just need a little bit of support from you guys in terms of making sure I can, get Uber rides and eat without having to think about like, oh, well, I have to write 15,000 articles and do all this social media work for this other company that I work for. So if you are so inclined, click on either of those links and those are easy ways to support me and getting coverage to you guys while I am there at the US Open. So that's the good part of it. The not so great part of it is that the day that I'm going is the day of the women's semifinal for the US Open, which is the same day as the week one game for the Dallas Cowboys. So if you were looking forward to any commentary or coverage from me during that game, might not happen. I will probably be watching two very awesome tennis players have a really intense match. However, if you follow me out, I might post something afterwards later. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But yeah, that night while everybody's on Twitter, like, oh my God, the Cowboys are doing such and such against the Eagles, I will probably be watching tennis. Ty Church, what's up? Good to see you in the chat. Okay, so let's get into this Micah Parsons situation. There's a couple of reasons why I'm talking about it. So, one, it's not nearly as serious of a situation as some people might believe, because I think right now the NFL fan base, when they hear the word grievance, they automatically think that it's something serious going on. Here's the truth: the CBA is a very long and complicated document, and there are a lot of specific procedures that are lined out for a lot of things in that document. But there are a lot of things that are not covered in that document. So if you ever decide to sit down and read the CBA for yourself, one thing you might want to read is something called Article 43. Article 43 of the CBA is what outlines non injury grievances. In other words, if there's a grievance brought to the NFL that does not involve a player injury, here's how we're going to handle it. And so, in that section, the TLDR of it all is that, okay, anything that's not covered by something else in the CBA is going to be handled by this. And that means the first step is to file a grievance. So, long story short, damn near anything that happens in the NFL that somebody's like, hey, I don't think this is right, it's going to result in a grievance. It doesn't always result in someone getting in trouble. It doesn't always result in like fines or anything. Sometimes it's just like, hey, this is the first step in the process to working it out. So in this situation, as a lot of people might be aware, the Dallas Cowboys picked up Micah Parsons' fifth year option. Great. That was smart for them to do that. However, the salary that you get when a team picks up your fifth year option is based on is based partially on the position that you play, the one that you're assigned to. And so essentially what's happened here is the Cowboys are paying Micah Parsons a salary based on the defensive end number. And that number changes based on some various things that have to deal with average salaries for that particular position, so on and so forth. We don't need to get into the math of it all. But essentially, the Dallas Cowboys are paying Micah Parsons what a defensive end should make. And Micah Parsons is like, hold up, I'm not a defensive end, I'm a linebacker, and that difference is about $2.7 million. So, when you're thinking about contracts worth like $20 million plus, for some of us, we might be like, well, I wouldn't care. But for players, they should definitely care. One, you don't want to build a habit of just like letting details slide in contracts because, imagine you're a 20 something year old, and whether it's in the NFL or it's in entertainment or something else, you're going to be dealing with contracts negotiations probably for the rest of your life. And so you don't want to build a habit of letting little things slide. Millions of dollars, even if you are getting paid tens of millions of dollars every year, they do add up, right? So it makes a difference. But the other part of it is that this could have implications for other people who might experience the same thing. Across the NFL, player flex and position versatility is becoming more and more common. So while it stands out in the situation of Micah Parsons, because I think for the longest time people didn't care if he was a defensive end or if he was a linebacker, it was like a fun little debate to have. But for the most part, people just wanted him to go out there and scare the shit out of the opposing quarterbacks. And they didn't care what you called him, where you lined him up, what kind of stance he was in. It was just like, just go out there and do your shit. Cool. But now we're in a situation where it actually matters. And so he has filed a grievance. Technically, the grievance is against the NFL. So for those who are quick to jump to blame Jerry Jones, this is not a situation where Jerry Jones has said, oh, I'm going to make him a defensive end so that I can, save this couple of $1 million. This is not that type of situation. This is something that somehow the NFL has him listed as a defensive end. Now, where that information came from, could it have involved the Cowboys and what paperwork they submitted? Possibly. On that part, I'm not really sure. And here's the thing about grievances, because if you're someone who watches me a lot, then you're used to me pulling up documents and being like, here's the original filing and yada, yada, yada. When it comes to grievances against the NFL, grievances involving the NFLPA, NFL players, so on and so forth, those things are not public. As a matter of fact, had it not been for someone with knowledge of the situation sharing information about this, the public would not even know about it. There's not a public database where anybody can go to find out what players have filed grievances for what reason or against who. That it's not public the way it is with like a lawsuit, for example. So there may be some details in there that we don't know. And there may even have to be some evidence and some testimony that we may never hear. So let me go ahead and pull this up. I meant to pull this up already so that it'll be up on your screens. But I wrote about this for Cowboys Wire. There are a couple of other articles about it. Um, but I'm gonna show y'all what I put in my article. Just give me 1 second here. And we're gonna enlarge that so we can get to the paragraph. Okay. So, this section that I have up on your screen says the dispute comes down to how Parsons is categorized. Dallas has him listed as a defensive end, which places him at the lower salary figure. Parsons maintains he is a linebacker. So, um, some of the things that may complicate this in people's minds are, for example, his accolades. So, he was selected for the Pro Bowl 4 times. 3 times as a linebacker, but this most recent time it was a defensive end. And then same thing for his All American honors. It was awarded for him as a linebacker. In college, he was a linebacker. When he won Defensive Rookie of the Year, he was a linebacker. His All Pro recognition. The first time he went All Pro, it was as a linebacker. Second time, it was as an edge rusher, and the third time, it was also as an edge rusher. Okay. But here's what the CBA says. The CBA says that whatever he gets for his fifth year option is determined by the position where he played the most snaps in his third season. So in the CBA, it specifically says the third league year. So that's what they're going to look at. Now, of course, me being the person that I am, I got curious and I was like, okay, well, there's ways we can find out that information. So shout out to PFF. I went and looked. And so here are the numbers that I found according to that for each of the 4 years that he's played. And so if we look at 2023, which will be his third season, his third league year, he played 347 snaps at defensive end, 498 snaps at linebacker, and 17 snaps at some other position. So if PFF is accurate, then Micah Parsons is correct, and he should be paid for the linebacker level salary for his 5th year option. However, there are some things that are open to interpretation. So, pretty much where a player is lined up, it kind of that's what lets people determine what position they are. But the lines can get a little fuzzy. So that's what I'm outlining here right above the numbers that I presented, where I said Pro Football Focus offers these stats as part of their premium package, though the counts are subjective and differentiating between um, uh, left edge outside or right edge outside. And 3 to 4 outside linebacker alignments, or sorry, I'm reading that wrong because of the way my brain processes acronyms, but y'all get what I'm saying. So basically, long story short, the formation is what determines how a particular player might be assigned a position depending on where they line up. So there's a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to, okay, we might see him line up in a certain position, but to some people that might be a linebacker, to some people that might still be a defensive end. And I pulled up a little bit more information about that just to give y'all some details. Give me 1 second to pull that up. Da, 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 da. Okay, here we go. Sorry for having to pull this up. Usually by the time I schedule these, I'm like just finishing up work and I'm just like running in to like get dressed and set everything up. Okay, so it's the subjectivity that is the issue. So the fact that he's truly a hybrid edge is one of the things that really makes this complicated. And so even though there are specific definitions for what a linebacker is and for what an edge rusher is or for what a defensive end is, when it comes to looking at the snaps, that is the part that a lot of people may look at differently. And so the truth be told, we don't really know how the NFL determines that. We don't know what exactly happened that caused him to be assigned the position of defensive end in the first place. And I'm gonna get better at my notes, I promise y'all. Okay, I needed to scroll up. Here we go. All right, so earlier I said edge is not edge. It's left end outside, right end outside, pretty much the same thing, yada yada yada. So one of the things I wrote down was it's a scheme versus role differentiation. So in a 4-3 defense, a defensive end, they pretty much always rush a passer from a 3-point stance, right? So easy to clarify. So 4-3, I think most of my viewers know what a 4-3 defense is. Like obviously 4 people in the front, 3 people behind them. In a 3-4 defense, an outside linebacker often does the exact same thing. They rush off the edge, but because he's standing up, he's technically a linebacker. So that's one of the situations where things might get a little fuzzy, right? So the terms that are used sometimes are hybrid terms anyway, because in the moment, it really doesn't matter what a person is labeled as. Like there's nothing in the rule book that says, oh, you have to designate this person as an edge or as a linebacker in order for them to do anything. That's one aspect of the game where it doesn't really matter. So here's another good example. Like here's another example that people might be able to relate to when it comes to player flex and versatility and how that can get mistaken. So Mozzie Smith, right? This preseason, a lot of people have had a lot to say about his performance. Matt Eberflus came out and was like, hey, I believe he can be an attack front guy. Mozzie Smith came out and said, okay, I'm working on splitting doubles. I'm working on some of the aspects of attack front, yada, yada, yada. So you had some people defending Mozzie Smith's performance, and they were saying things like, okay, he's keeping the linebackers clean, right? But that wasn't his job in the defense. But they were saying that under the understanding that Mozzie Smith is a nose tackle, right? That's how he was drafted. That's what one of the things that he was good at in Michigan. That's what he became known for. A nose tackle, maybe a one tech, right? But what determines if someone is a nose tackle is technically not what's on paper, it's where they are lined up. A nose tackle is right in front of the center. So if you think about these preseason games and watching how Eberflus has people set up, when have you ever seen a nose tackle? I don't recall seeing it at all. And if it was like rare. But you don't see anybody lined up right over the center in Eberflus's defense. So therefore, saying Mozzie Smith is a nose tackle is technically a misnomer because it depends on where he is aligned. So we've seen Mozzie Smith as a one tech. I think we might have seen him at a three. I don't remember. But I know in this defense, it's been like 1 and 3, right? You see odd numbers because Eberflus wants people shooting the gaps and trying to disrupt the offense. So if you hear zeros or even numbers, there's some crazy shit going on. Anyway, but so to say Mozzie Smith is a nose tackle is technically incorrect. So you may know him as that, but he hasn't been used that way. So same thing with Micah Parsons and how his position has been determined. People may know him as a linebacker, but how has he been used? For whatever reason, he was labeled as a defensive end in 2024, but how was he used? And what determines how he was used? When it comes to the guys on the line, it's pretty clear. Like we know, like, okay, if you're lined up over the center, you're a nose tackle. If you're lined up, in the A gaps, you're a one tech, so on and so forth. Like we know that. When it comes to whether somebody's a linebacker or a defensive end, it's not always as clear, especially when they're lined up in the places and used in the ways that Mike Parsons has been lined up and used. So I hope that makes it make sense. So that's really what the grievance is about. It's not necessarily that somebody has done something wrong, unless it turns out that someone mislabeled him on purpose for the sake of lowering the salary that he's supposed to receive. Now, if that happens, then we've got a whole nother issue on our hands. But the reason why I brought that up is because when it comes to testimony, depending on what they go through in order to determine what he was at any during any given snap, some of it might come down to conversations that he had with coaches. Because what if, even according to the way that the NFL determines what position he was for any given snap, it's still fuzzy, and they need to go talk to Dan Quinn or somebody like that and be like, hey, when you talk to him about his role in this particular formation, what words did you use? Like, were any of y'all in meetings? Did y'all hear how he was referred to when y'all would go over film? So this, when it comes to this type of grievance, this might be one of the more complicated examples that we've ever seen, but it is something that I think will help everybody in terms of there are a lot of players who have come into the league and maybe they were a safety and they end up being used as a linebacker, or they are tackle and they end up being used as a guard, or as a center, as we've seen in some cases, or running backs who end up being used as wide receivers and vice versa. Um, when it comes to teams taking advantage of the fifth year option, there's only so many times that that will happen. There's only so many opportunities that that's going to happen because it only happens to first rounders, and it's only going to happen to first rounders that pan out. So this is not something that every player is going to have to think about every year, but it is one of those things that because of the value of players that have that kind of flexibility, it could come up. I mean, hell, like think about Travis Hunter, right? Like if he really does come into the league and he's playing both sides of the ball, and the Jaguars are like, yo, fifth year option, hey, we're doing it. Like, where do you put him? What salary does he get? So this could have implications. Like, what if we start seeing teams draft these players who are good at multiple positions, but then like manipulating snaps because it's like, okay, this is their third season. Whatever we pay them moving forward is going to be determined by what we do this third season. So we do what's best for the team and just pay them accordingly, or do we want to manipulate the snaps and just so we can make sure that we keep the salary low, and if the team suffers for it, it's whatever. So I want to see if y'all left any comments about this because I see comments showing up in the chat, but I can't really see where they are. Me brings up a good point. Says isn't his podcast called The Edge? um, you're not wrong, and luckily that will not count against him in this particular grievance. But that is an example that I had not thought about, and he might even come up with some crazy other reason why it's called The Edge. But no, that's a good one. That is a very good call out. Castro family says, "How did it go from I'm willing to take a pay cut to trying to scrape the bottom of the barrel for every penny?" Uh, that's a really good question. And honestly, I think it has a lot to do with his agent. Um, I've been looking into how his agent has handled past situations, and I think the most comparable situation I can find is how his agent, David Mulligetta, handled negotiations with T. Higgins and the Bengals. So that one didn't get as much publicity because T. Higgins doesn't have the popularity of Micah Parsons. Most players don't. Most defensive players for sure don't. But essentially, it was a very combative negotiation process that resulted in T. Higgins asking for a trade. But ultimately, T. Higgins ended up going with another agent. And according to reports, and I haven't dug into this like super, super deep, but according to reports, part of the reason that T. Higgins ended up asking for a different agent, or going with a different agent, was because he wanted somebody who wasn't so hard nosed and who wasn't so combative. He wanted someone who was kind of willing to meet the team in the middle. And so I just thought that was like interesting that that was how that situation panned out, and that it was kind of the same thing where it's like, okay, this player is asking for a lot of guaranteed money, a lot of just a high salary for his position, ends up asking for a trade. There's this tense back and forth between the player and the organization. But then it ended with that particular player being like, you know what, I don't really like doing business this way. I'm going to work with someone else. Um so that if you kind of look on Reddit for David Mulligetta's name, and kind of look into some of the negotiations that he's handled with his players and teams in the past, you can see that he has developed a reputation for wanting a lot of guaranteed money specifically. And when it comes to his players that are stars, that are staples of the team that they're on, he can get very stubborn about it. So if I had to guess, like, my assumption is that there was some conversation that happened between Micah Parsons and David Mulligetta that convinced Micah Parsons that he needed to get every single bit that he could. And I can't say that that's necessarily wrong. I just think it depends on how you go about it, you know? And I'm not even saying that Micah is going about it the wrong way. When it comes to options that players have for getting what they feel like they deserve, they don't have a ton of options. So your options are pretty much have a conversation with the decision makers, because on a lot of teams your GM is not the same person as the owner. So whoever the decision maker is, it's like, okay, have a conversation with them, negotiate with them. But then what you don't want to do is start playing, and then get injured before you have an extension in place, and then that hurts your value. And then you end up getting less than what you could have gotten if you had just sat out. And so we do know that Micah suffered some injuries last season. We do know that he's maintained this entire time that his back is hurt. So while sitting out of practices is sometimes used as a tactic for negotiation, Micah Parsons maintains that he is having back issues. I was about to say we don't have any reason to think otherwise, but I would say I'm not going to contest that without evidence, because he could very well have back issues and also be in the midst of some very tense negotiations with the team. Two things can be true. And one thing that I don't want to do is put out allegations that he's like lying, because also according to the CBA, that could lead to like really bad consequences for Micah and anybody else who knows that he's not telling the truth, if it were the case that he's not telling the truth. So I'm just going to maintain that he's telling the truth. His back is hurt. He's got to get some additional care for it, some additional opinions, and that's where we are. Um, but yeah, when it comes to the whole idea that he's not satisfied with whatever offer the Cowboys have made, whether it's because of the dollar amount or how much is guaranteed or some other detail, because we really don't know. Micah has said a few things about what he doesn't like, But when it comes to the actual offer itself, neither he nor his agent has really been specific about what the issue is. So we really don't know. But um yeah, when it comes to like the change of heart, the change of mind, I'm assuming it's because of David Mulligetta and his influence. Castro says, "Do you believe that Jerry Jones offered him the biggest non-QB contract back in March? And if so, why would the agent not advise Parsons to take it?" Um, it's very possible. I don't see why he wouldn't, because while people do criticize Jerry Jones for not getting contracts done fast enough, part of the criticism is because when he ultimately does get these deals done, there's a very high dollar amount given out to these players. So it could be that even if Michael was offered something that would have made him the highest paid non QB, Mulligetta just didn't think it was high enough, or Parsons just didn't think it was high enough. It could be that there wasn't enough guaranteed money. It could be that there's some other term of the contract that they didn't like, some other detail. So we don't really know. But if I'm going based off the pattern that Mulligetta normally presents, it makes me assume that it has something to do with the guaranteed money. But that's just an assumption based off patterns. I really have no idea. I have received no inside information concerning this. Daniel Earl over on X says, "I'm concerned about Micah's situation will affect negotiations with Pickens, who shares the same agent." It's not impossible, especially if this leads to some kind of bad blood. So the other day I wrote a different article about the possibility of a grievance. So in this situation that I've been talking about with y'all so far, Micah Parsons did definitely file a grievance earlier this year. The other article that I wrote earlier this week, was that yesterday? This week is flying by. Oh my god. But the other article was about the possibility of a grievance, because Ryan Clark made a statement on Get Up that I thought was interesting. But he was like, "I think we'll see a grievance filed about how the situation has been handled pretty soon." Um, and he didn't say why he thought that. That was like a really random thing to throw out there. But it got me curious about whether or not the NFLPA could file a grievance. Um, and it turns out they can, but they can based on a standard that is kind of vague. So there's a section of the CBA that says if anybody who's negotiating does anything publicly, well, no, it's not even just negotiations. So basically, if you do anything that publicly, quote unquote, casts discredit on anyone in the league, or any player, anyone doing business, so that would include agents, um, then you could be subject to certain action. And so if the NFLPA decides that Jerry Jones has cast discredit on David Mulligetta in some kind of way by, for example, saying something like, "Yeah, he told me to take that contract and shove it up my ass." If it turns out that that was bad, it could impact how Jerry Jones himself is allowed to handle conversations with David Mulligetta moving forward. It could impact his leverage. So, like, let's say Jerry Jones is given a warning, and Mulligetta is like, "Hey, if you don't handle this in a way that I think is appropriate, I can file a grievance, and this warning can go up to a fine," something like that. I'm just spitballing here. I'm just speculating. I don't actually know the likelihood of any of this playing out. But when it comes to the situation affecting negotiations with Pickens, if it were to, I think that would be how it would be affected. I just think that's more likely than money that Micah is getting affecting money that Pickens would get. That would just be weird. All right. So those are those comments. If y'all have any other questions or comments about this particular situation, let me know. I do want to talk a little bit about the roster moves that were made today. Before I get into that, though, if you're watching, please hit the like button on whatever platform you're on. Like, I don't really, I'm not discriminating today. So if you're on YouTube, hit the like button on YouTube. If you're on X, hit the like button on X. If you are on Twitch, subscribe, please, because I have like no followers, subscribers, or whatever you want to call it on Twitch, and hit that like button on all platforms. Follow me, subscribe, turn your notifications on, just to make sure that you are notified next time I go live or share any other type of content. So, that being said, I'll keep an eye out for any other questions about this particular situation. But I do want to talk about some of the roster moves that happened And I don't think I have any of the lists pulled up. Hold on. Let me pull up. I don't know. There's like 5,000 articles that have been written. As a matter of fact, maybe we should just go to what was the name of the cornerback? Dallas Cowboys new cornerback. Because it was an odd name. Trickweezy Bridges. Is that how we say his name? I don't know. And if I'm saying it wrong, I genuinely apologize. Um, but yeah, let's talk about them specifically. I know there were some other changes made today, but I'm gonna start with this because this was the most significant change in my opinion, was the addition of these two cornerbacks. Now, yesterday when I went live from the radio station, people were hella mad about Andrew Booth making that 53-man roster. People were pissed about it. People had a lot of feelings, especially with it being that Israel McQuamu was not on that list, and seeing Andrew Booth on the list and Izzy wasn't. People had strong feelings. So fast forward about 24 hours, all of a sudden it's a non-issue. Andrew Booth was released. Uh, Zion Childress was cut, and we got two other people. And it sounds like they're trying to get Zion back. Andrew Booth, not so much. So I definitely want what's best for the guy. I met him, and he seems like a good dude. But in terms of the NFL, he's got some work to do. Maybe he'll have the opportunity to do it. Maybe he won't. I will say, when it comes to the current job market in the US, there are definitely worse options than ending up on a practice squad or even playing for the UFL. So if he still has it in him to, play professional football on some level for some team, some organization, by all means, do that shit. I wish you the best. But I want to talk about these guys, especially Mr. Is there a pronunciation key in this article? I doubt there is. No. So I'm gonna call him Trickweezy. I'm sorry. That sounds like some sort of Gen Z rapper. And that's why I feel like I'm saying it wrong. But actually, we'll call him Mr. Bridges, which ironically also sounds like the name of a Gen Z rapper. But Mr. Bridges, I was really intrigued by him because did I know anything about either of these young men before I looked them up today? No. But Mr. Bridges, when I looked him up, several articles mentioned him being a good star defense player. And so I was like, okay, that's interesting. That's something that we don't hear a lot of when it comes to Cowboys defensive players. So what the fuck is that? So the term star is actually something that was popularized by Nick Saban when he was coaching Alabama. And it was something that he put into plays and into playbooks. Daniel Earl says, call him TB. I like it. Still sounds like a Gen Z rapper, but Mr. Bridges, TB, a lot better than mispronouncing his name. Anyway, hold on, let me get a sip of water. Okay, so star position. Nick Saban popularized this. This was something that he used in his playbook a lot, and it was to describe a certain type of defensive player that was just separate from other players because of the amount of athleticism that they needed to possess, right? So a star was considered someone who was specifically a nickel corner combined with like a strong safety. So like that's like a pretty specific set of skills. So we're talking about someone who can both like be fast, help stop the run. It's very smart. So sometimes, well, actually most of the time they're playing in space. I think I wrote down some notes on this as well. So let me pull those up. But I remember looking into this and being like, okay, so they want someone um, who could really kind of fill the gap, so to speak, when it comes to the need for speed and athleticism in the defense, secondary specifically. Because I think that was one of the biggest complaints that a lot of people had during the preseason when it came to the secondary is that, like, okay, well, there's just too much cushion for the cornerbacks. And when it comes to too much cushion, it's not just about the space. It's like, can your corners actually close that space, especially when, they're in zone coverage? And all too often in these preseason games, it seemed like the answer to that question was no, they cannot. Sorry, I keep accidentally closing my notes. Okay. So, star position. Here's what I wrote down. It's a hybrid defender that merges traits of a nickel corner and strong safety, like I just said to you guys. Often in the slot, like a nickel, but close enough to the box to play the run. Must cover slot receivers and play physical like a linebacker, and is much more involved than a nickel corner and is expected to trigger downhill quickly. So think of it as a defense's Swiss Army knife in space. I can talk, y'all, I promise. So Swiss Army knife in space specifically. So when I first read that it was a hybrid position, I was like, okay, so some people are probably going to ask, well, why this guy over Izzy? This guy was a seventh round pick this particular year. So it's not even like he's some third or fourth rounder that people are like, oh my God, I can't believe he's available. Um, so thinking back to what Brian Schottenheimer said in his press conference about another decision that he had to make regarding Keemon Hall, and he was like, "Well, we decided to go with the younger guy." This is another situation where it's like, okay, maybe they decided to go with the younger guy, and it could be that simple. But not only the younger guy, but it also seems that he's likely the faster guy. He has a oh Lord, this is why I wish I had more time before streams because I definitely would have. I thought I had all this pulled up. But I'm looking up his 40 time. Let's see. 4.45 40-yard dash. So he's got size, length, speed. He matches up well with large receivers. This is according to scouting reports. Matches up well with large receivers and is a willing tackler. So when it comes to Izzy, um, he had good instincts when it comes to tackling, but I don't think his speed was quite on the level with what people are saying to expect from this particular guy. And then for TB or Mr. Bridges, I think people look at him as a cornerback first with the ability to kind of play that strong safety role. Whereas I think with Izzy, it was a little bit more vague. There was a little bit more gray area. And I think a lot of people looked at him as like either just a general DB or maybe safety first. I don't know. I'm not really sure. I didn't hear a lot of people refer to Izzy by his position. It was just like, oh, Izzy is dope. Like, he's great. So yeah, I think it comes down to youth. I think it comes down to speed, and I think it comes down to specifically the ability to play both in space and run downhill. And honestly, probably just some specific traits that Eberflus was looking for um, that may not jump out on paper or even jump out immediately on film. I think sometimes when it comes to moves like this, where it's like a little bit harder to understand, we might not get it until we see this guy in game. We might not get it until we see what the scheme actually looks like. Which, like, while we're on the topic, um, the game against the Eagles is just over a week away, So a lot of the questions that we have about like who was kept on the roster, who was brought onto the team, and why, it's gonna be answered during that game. Um, and if you're new here, I don't necessarily do predictions, so don't expect me to come each week with who I think is going to win or lose. But in terms of predicting what I think is going to happen, one of the things I think is going to happen is that we are going to get a real live look at how these schemes actually work on either side of the ball. So when it comes to the defense, attack front sounds great on paper. It's like, yeah, we want guys splitting doubles. We want guys shooting the gaps, like rushing the quarterback's clock, disrupting the offense. Great idea, but what about the execution? Like, do we have guys with enough size to actually do that against some of the guys that are on the offensive lines of some of these NFL teams? Like, y'all have seen the pictures of the Eagles' offensive line. Like, do we have guys with enough size, enough strength to actually handle them and actually disrupt the way that it seems like this defense is being set up to have that happen? We won't know until we see it. We can speculate all day. We won't know until we see it. And then the same thing on the offensive side of the ball. Like Shoddy infamously said, when it comes to the offense, like, and that run game, we want to shove it up their ass. Okay, well, in order to do that, you have to have like a very strong run game. You have to have a very strong, very solid O line. You have to have a good scheme in place to set your runners up for success. Um, and that's no matter what philosophy you apply to the offense, whether you want to call it the shove it up your ass offense, whether you want to refer to what Schottenheimer said about his rule of 53 or 55 or whatever, if you want to refer to past statistics about how well Dak Prescott does or does not do, depending on how the run game looks, you need a solid run game. You need a cohesive and solid O line in order to have that solid run game. And you need some running backs who can take hits, break tackles, who can, read things, who can get out in space. Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. So while I don't know who's gonna win and who's gonna lose, because I think Cowboys fans are pessimistic right now because it's like if you hyper focus on a team during the preseason, you're gonna see a lot of not great football because everybody's trying to evaluate the players that we don't know a lot about. So you might see some of those cool clips from camp of like Dak Prescott and CD, and be like, oh yeah, that's so cool. Like they're doing what they always do. Um, but what people are going to be looking at a lot is the rookies, the newcomers. They're going to be looking at the new schemes. They're going to be evaluating what these new coordinators are doing, and so you're going to see a lot of things that don't work out, and it will fill your head with images of all the ways that the Dallas Cowboys can fail, right? But you got to think other teams are going through the same things. They are having to work with new players, even if they don't have new coordinators, which I know the Eagles have at least one new coordinator. I don't know about the other side of the ball. I haven't even really like looked into it like that for real. Um, but they're dealing with personnel changes too. They're dealing with staff changes too. So we don't know what their weaknesses might be. Now, I know there's still a lot of reason to be nervous, but like at the end of the day, all we can do is wait and see. We might not really know who this team is, who the Dallas Cowboys really are for like several weeks. Um, Kevin says Howie is building this team. What is Jerry doing? I'm not. I don't even know why I read that. I'm not entertaining that shit. I'm not going to answer for any of these millionaires or billionaires. If you are proud of what Howie is doing for your team, be proud of that. I've had enough of trying to explain Jerry Jones. Jerry Jones is doing what he's always done. Jerry Jones is doing what the fuck he's done for 30 years. And some years it's worked out and some years it hasn't. And we'll see what happens in 2025. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But no, I've said it before. Any possible outcome that could come from this, Jerry Jones has experienced. And I think that's part of the reason that he is so flippant about it is because, like, oh, losing who people think is the best player in the league. Yeah, been there, done that. We were all right. Um, having a player sit out for a couple of weeks into the season, been there, done that, been all right. Contentious negotiations, players requesting trades. Like there were several players apparently from, those great teams of the 90s that said they wanted out of the Cowboys. They're like, yo, get me the fuck out of here, trade me. And so Jerry Jones like, yeah, I've seen it. I've dealt with it, been there, done that. It's whatever. And so ain't really shit you can. What the fuck can you tell an 84-year-old billionaire, especially a billionaire who made his billions by being who he is? Like old people are already known for being set in their ways, and then it's like being set in his ways made him one of the richest men in the world. So he does not care what any of us are saying on these little podcasts and YouTube shows. So that's that. Is there anything else I want to discuss as far as moves? Honestly, not really. The moves are interesting, but unless y'all have specific questions, I don't really have anything else to say about it just because I'm very much the type of person that I'm more so a wait and see person. So like these moves with the defensive backs I thought were interesting just because like I've been very interested in how this attack front defense is going to look and what the secondary is going to look like in response to how different the guys in front are going to look. um, and so like I like this idea of youth and speed. I like it conceptually, but I need to see it play out. And so that's kind of how I feel about everything. So no, I do not have any stronger opinions than that about any of the moves that were made. I've been listening to a lot of people's shows and some of the Twitter spaces and it's all interesting, but at this point I'm just like, all right, we got a week. I'm gonna wait and see. And that's that. Okay. So on that note, I want to talk to y'all about what happened at the US Open. Some people are describing this on social media by saying things like it was almost a fight at the US Open. I don't think it was almost a fight, but there are several reasons why I do think that the confrontation between Taylor Townsend and her opponent was very interesting. So I want to play y'all a video because I know a lot of y'all are here for like NFL news, but like this was like probably the most tense confrontation I've ever seen in any tennis match. And it's like we're talking tennis matches where we've seen people like throw rackets, we've seen people get ejected, we've seen people get cussed out, but like I thought it was gonna get worse than it did. I'm proud of Taylor Townsend for not letting it go there, but I definitely thought it was gonna get worse than what it did. So let me go ahead and pull that up. Brian Bradford, Ostapenko, yes. I didn't want to say it because while I typed her name on Twitter, I wasn't sure how to pronounce it. That has been like my issue of the night is how do you pronounce these people's names? But hold on, let me bring up this video so we can kind of talk about what exactly happened. And I'm gonna pause it throughout, but like ESPN actually did like a really good job of like clipping everything together.
Was knocked out of the tournament. Jelena Ostapenko and American Taylor Townsend playing the Latvian. Taylor #1 in the world in doubles, but beating Ostapenko in singles in the third round, who was seeded 25th, is an upset. It was a good win for Taylor Townsend, 7-5, 6-1 on court 11. Ostapenko
Okay, so watch this, y'all.
said something on the handshake. Words were exchanged. Taylor, as expected, an American player, had a huge crowd with her all throughout the match. Neither one backed down. Finally, Taylor walks away. But as she does, she wants to hear it from the crowd. She continues.
Okay, so before we keep going, one of the things that I want to point out is that, hey, Chris, good to see you in the chat. Don't forget to hit the like button. But one of the things that I want to point out is that when Taylor went up to Ostapenko and was talking to her, Ostapenko was the one like pointing and had like the aggressive hand motions. Like if you look at Taylor Townsend's hands, she was just like, "What? What happened?" You know. And so the first thing that I noticed, because I was watching it live, like I was sitting here working on something for one of the companies that I work for, and I'm just like, kind of like waiting for like them to say something about the score, and she wins, and I'm like, oh, awesome, did that, and then all of a sudden I look up, and it's like this confrontation, right? But I was really proud of her for not getting back in Ostapenko's face, because like Ostapenko was like doing the point, and Taylor Townsend never even so much as pointed back. The whole time she was just like, hey, I don't. Apparently, it came out that Ostapenko was mad about some sort of netball situation, and Taylor was like, I don't have to apologize. But she never pointed back. She never leaned in. She never presented herself as an imposing physical presence. And I just thought that showed restraint. I also loved, and it's not shown here, but when I was watching it live, the announcers were like very supportive, because sometimes when the optics are like this, especially like when it's a black woman and a white athlete, it's just like, oh, she needs to calm down. She's so angry. Like, why she's being so violent? Did I like? There was no violence. So it's like there were some jokes about like, Taylor Townsend taking her earrings off, which she didn't do, but like people were using that as like a meme or as like a gift to go along with narratives of the situation. But like there were like she never threatened to swing on this chick or nothing. I'm not even certain that she even like used any profanity. I felt like she was very composed, and I thought it was really dope of the announcers to like really be like, "Hey, we love to see this fight," and just like really be supportive of her standing up for herself. I thought it was dope that the crowd was so much behind her. I know this is a U.S. Open. Um, Taylor Townsend is from Chicago, and so it's really easy to root for the American. But like that hasn't always been the case at every tennis event in the past. Like Venus and Serena went through a lot when it came to how they presented themselves. Even Serena just having this body type, like it was not as well accepted at the time. And so there's just been like a lot of progress in the tennis world, but let's keep going.
To get the crowd pumped up. Chris Budden spoke to her right after the match on court.
Can you fill us in on the conversation you were having with Yelena out there?
Yeah, I mean, it's competition. People get upset when they lose, and you can't. Some people say bad things. She told me I have no class, I have no education, and to see what happens when we get outside the U.S. So I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I beat her in Canada outside the U.S. I beat her in New York outside the U.S. So let's see what else she has to say.
All right, so this was something else that I thought was interesting when she was like, I beat her in New York outside the US. And she clearly misspoke there, which is something that can happen when you're tired and you just ended a match. But in the comments of one of the posts of this video, somebody was like, did she just say she beat her in New York outside the US? And there were people even defending her in the comments, like, hey, don't be an asshole. Clearly she misspoke. You know what she meant. Overall, the point was, this woman said she had no class and no education, and that's rude, yada yada yada. So like even in the comments, people were standing up for Taylor Townsend, which I was like really impressed with. I was expecting the trolls to just come out in full force and take over the comments, but there were people who like actually love tennis, actually love Taylor Townsend, and were like, no, we're not doing that here. So that was pretty cool. But when I heard the words no class, no education, like that was when I first was like, was this racially motivated? But here's why I try not to play the race card. It's because when you do it so much, it kind of starts to like lose its effectiveness when there are situations where that actually does need to come into play. Because like, yes, there are some situations where people will say that and it turns out to not be the case. And then you have a situation where it's like, no, this was actually racially motivated, this is an issue, and then people are like, oh, y'all play the race card all the time. So I personally try not to do it. And in this case, what she did was bad enough to where it wasn't even necessary to play the race card. Like I'm just like, all right, regardless of what Taylor Townsend looks like, to tell someone that they have no class and no education over a tennis match, that's rude as fuck. I don't even have to talk about her being a black woman to address the fact that that is bad sportswomanship and that is like inappropriate to do at the end of the match once the match is decided. Like I thought that was crazy. Um, Daniel Earl said, "You think that she meant that she beat her outside the U.S. Open? Maybe. I'm not sure. Um, I'm not sure." That felt less relevant to me than like everything else about the statement. Maybe. I didn't look up their head to head matches, and maybe I should to see just how many times Taylor has beat Ostapenko, and maybe that plays a role into it because they face each other more than once. I know, and so maybe we're at a point where Yelena Ostapenko was just like, "I'm tired of this woman beating me, and I'm gonna say what I got to say." And the world was like, no, the fuck you're not. um, Brian says she was upset with the net court of a big point that went Thompson's way and didn't apologize. And in the warm up, she did volleys at the net first instead of the backcourt's rallies. Um, and Brian adds, which is kind of stupid and petty. So, yes, I did read about that. And I agree. It is kind of stupid and petty. And so, they're going to address that like after this. So, there's more to this clip because she was interviewed here and then they did the post match press conference, which I'm gonna tell y'all, when I watched that post match press conference, I was taken aback because once again, historically, tennis has not been the most progressive place. So I was like, how are they going to paint this? How are they going to address it? And they came out the gate with the as a black woman. And I was like, oh, so we're going straight there. Like, do not pass go, do not collect $200. We are going straight to the, hey, these comments are rude to black women. Like, what do you have to say? Let me see if it's right after this, as a matter of fact.
Yelena Stepanko responded to this. Just a small update about the match. Today, after the match, I told my opponent that she was very disrespectful as she had a net ball.
Hold on. First of all, let's address the fact that she wasn't honest. She's like, I told my opponent that she was very disrespectful. No, we heard what you said. First of all, we heard what you really said, and there's a reason that you don't want to repeat it in your Instagram stories. But neither here nor there.
In a very deciding moment and didn't say sorry. But her answer was that she doesn't have to say sorry at all. There are some rules in tennis which most of the players follow, and it was the first time ever that this happened to me on tour. If she plays in her homeland, it doesn't mean that she can behave or do whatever she wants. Taylor Townsend went into press and an extended Q&A ensued.
For a lot of
So I just have to call it out again. The fact that she was like, I told her that she was very disrespectful. No, you said she had no class and no education. And statements like that are fucking disrespectful. So like, why won't you go on your Instagram stories and say what you really said? Like, there's a reason why. Because you know that shit was fucked up. You know that was fucked up. Like, quit playing. Like, you're going to go and try to like clean up the language. Oh, I said you was disrespectful. No, say it with your whole chest. Say what you really said. Since you want to go on your Instagram stories and talk about it, if y'all can't tell, this shit made me so mad.
Black people hearing no education, no class would be interpreted, and rightfully so, as a dog whistle. Do you believe that that had racial undertones? And for black people and black women who will hear about this and may have dealt with certain situations where they've had comments where they've interpreted it as more than just competition, what would you say to them?
Um,
So that's what I meant by they went straight into the as a black woman. I wasn't expecting that at the US Open. I didn't even know that they normally had black reporters there because I that's a voice that I haven't heard. And maybe I haven't watched enough post match press conferences from the US Open, but I was just like, who is this? Did they like import a black man to ask these questions? Because who is that voice? I've not heard that voice, but he did his thing though.
um, so that's a two-part question. First, no, I don't know. I can't speak on what her intentions were. I can only speak on how I handled the situation. And how I handled it is someone who's upset about the outcome that occurred. You lost and you're upset about that. Saying I have no education and no class, I don't really take that personally because I know that it's so far from the truth and so far from anything. And again, if I allow what other people have to say about me affect me in that way, then they win. So ultimately, no, I stood up for myself and I kept in my mind in that moment how I wanted to portray myself and how I wanted to show up. And if my son were to see this interaction, how would he view it? The thing that I'm the most proud of is that I let my racket talk because ultimately I'm the one here sitting in front of you guys, moving on to the next round, getting the next check, moving on, being able to still be here and speak to you guys. And that's what's the most important. She's packed up and she's gone. I'm here.
Ostapenko then.
So before we get into what Austin Pinko, she said more stuff in her IG story. I want to address a few things about what Taylor said and what's true about Taylor Townsend. So Taylor Townsend is from Chicago. She is a black woman. She is a single mom. And I think because of those facts, there have been certain assumptions made about her. So when it comes to her education, she started focusing on her professional tennis career at the age of 14, which means that she said, okay, instead of high school, I'm going to, and I forget what the name of the school is, but basically, if you follow tennis, you know there are a lot of kids who start tennis at a very young age before they're legally adults in the U.S. And during a time when they would normally be in high school. And so there actually is a pathway for kids to shift from a traditional education to focusing on tennis and still getting an education, but focusing on tennis, right? And so that is basically what Taylor Townsend did. So she's not just somebody who just wandered onto the US Open stage. That's not why she's unranked. She's been working at her craft for a very long time, for 15 years. She's 29 now. Um, and so to say that she's uneducated and has no class, like if that was true, she wouldn't be where she is. And so is she different in terms of how she presents herself and her culture from a lot of people in the tennis world? Yeah. And there are a lot of people who are. Like that's one thing that I can say about the American tennis players is that there is a lot of diversity there. But that diversity has been embraced. Like uh, you know, Coco Gauff, uh Taylor Townsend, Francis Tiafoe, they all bring something different to the table. You know what I'm saying? So they're not even all the same kind of black, if that makes sense. If you're black, that phrase probably means something to you. And if you're not, you might be like, what the fuck you mean? But basically, no race. is a monolith. And so sometimes when people talk about like, oh, black tennis players, they kind of like try to assume that there's some common thread between them. And honestly, there isn't, except that they're black. Like, I feel like if Coco Gauff had been in that situation, it would have played out slightly differently. Like, Coco Gauff would have stood up for herself, but it would have looked different. She probably wouldn't have pumped up the crowd and pointed at her opponent afterwards. And her answer in the post match press conference might have been slightly different. Um, so it's like, yes, is it dope that there are so many black women on the tennis scene right now, especially for America? Yes, but are they the same? No, they're not the same. And the other thing that I want to mention is what Taylor said about getting the next check, which I just thought was something interesting to present to people who may not know how tennis payments go. So basically, once you qualify for a tennis tournament, so like for US Open, last week they had the qualifiers, and this week is when they started the actual rounds. So once you qualify for the first round, you get a certain amount of money. Then if you win and you go to the next round, you get another amount. So um, the second round, also known as the round of 64, everybody who made it to that round in singles, whether you're a man or a woman, because they get paid the same amount. Shout out to Venus Williams for pushing for that for so long. But men and women get the same amount in singles, and so to play in the second round, that means you are getting $154,000 for the tournament. Now, if you get eliminated, that's what you get in the second round. But if you go on to the third round, your check increases. So Taylor Townsend is going to a round to where she's going to get at least $237,000, whereas Ostapenko is she's going home with $154,000. So that's a difference of about $83,000. So it is something that you might be upset about, but like you need to handle that personally or through therapy, not by yelling insults at your opponent. Um anyway, that said, let's go ahead and watch the rest of this.
Responded, "Wow, how many messages I received that I'm a racist. I was never racist in my life, and I respect all nations of people in the world. For me, it doesn't matter where you come from. There are some rules in tennis, and unfortunately, when the crowd is with you, you can't use it in disrespectful way to your opponent. Unfortunately for me, coming from a small country, I don't have that huge support and a chance to play in homeland. I always love to play in the U.S. and the U.S. Open, but this is the first time someone is approaching the match this disrespectful way."
I honestly think had she just shaken hands, walked away, and said later, yo, I think what Taylor Townsend did was really disrespectful, people might have just been like, okay, you can feel that way. There might have been a debate about some of the unspoken rules of tennis, some of the cultural traditions of tennis, yada, yada, yada. Clearly, the reason why people are saying Ostapenko, why her comments were racially motivated, because it's like, what the hell do any of the unspoken rules of tennis have to do with someone supposedly lacking class or lacking in education? Like, why would you even say that to somebody? And so it seems like the only reason you would feel it's appropriate to say something like that is because you look at a black woman who you may or may not realize by this point is also a single mom. Um, and you feel like you had the right, you have the leeway to throw out those kinds of insults, because even with it being that she's and they're going to talk about this after this clip. Even with it being that she's apparently not that well liked in the tennis world, there's no accounts of her talking to other opponents like this, right? So it's like, why is it that when you face a black woman, all of a sudden it's they have a lack of class and